Hello. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this month's live stream. Hey, Simon. Hey, Tim. How's it going?
Hello. How are you?
Good. So I think everyone's met Simon before, but I don't think we've met Tim.
Hey, how you doing?
Tim, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Tim, and I'm one of the engineers, and I work on Java and Spring services at Microsoft.
Nice. Yeah, and in a few minutes, Tim's going to tell us all about running Java apps on container apps. So look forward to that. So like every time, we're going to start off with just going through a bunch of community links that's in part of our newsletter. So I'll share the link to the newsletter. So if you want to go check it out, you want to click on the links, this is where you go. And down here is where we list out all the different links that you all have contributed. So let's go through them now. So Tiago, who actually I just saw in the chat, wrote an article about how to simplify the cloud deployment process with Azure Container Apps. So it kind of goes over some of the benefits of using container apps, and kind of comparing it to other ways that you can deploy your apps, I guess. And here we have Massimo with a blog post about how to use the resiliency policies that we introduced a few months ago in container apps. So check that out. They go into quite a bit of detail about how to turn it on, as well as how to, kind of see that it's working. And Dan here has an article about how to do continuous deployment to Azure Container Apps. So they actually go through and talk about how you would set up an Azure DevOps pipeline to deploy to Azure Container Apps. And then, and I think they also talk about how the zero downtime deployment works when we deploy to single revision mode. And here, Ed's got a blog post about how to use YARP in Azure Container Apps. So YARP is something that came out of the .NET team, I believe, and it's I think it's short for yet another reverse proxy. So quite a few people have been trying to do this in container apps where they want just one single endpoint or domain and then kind of have different routes go to different apps within container apps. So we kind of go through how that works here with YARP. And coincidentally, Carrie on our team published an article about how to do pretty much the same thing using Nginx. So again, if you want to put multiple container apps behind the same domain name and just route to different apps using the path, you can do that with Nginx also. And then also on the Azure blogs, here's a pretty detailed article on how observability works in container apps. So we go into pretty deep detail about setting up observability and how to use it and finding problems in your container apps. And here's a two-part series actually on how to use the Python SDK to manage container apps. So this first one, I believe, is for apps, and there's also a follow-up one that Rachit has done for jobs. So make sure you check that out, especially for jobs. If you need to start jobs on demand, you can actually use the management SDK, in this case, the Python one, to do that. And lastly, which I think is going to lead us into the next topic pretty well, is that we announced Tomcat support in Azure Container Apps. Tim, do you have anything to talk about, like anything to add here, or do you want to wait until your presentation?
Yeah, we'll cover it in the presentation, but basically, yeah, we added support to run your Java applications on Tomcat in ACA. So that's really exciting because we know that some customers are doing that. So.
Yep, that's awesome. Okay, so with that, let's hand it over to you, Tim. Are you ready to share your screen?
Yeah, it should be shared. Do you see it?
Yep, I do.
Great.
There you
awesome.
go.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Hey, I'm so excited to share with you some of the work we've been doing today to bring a great Java experience to ACA, especially for those who are using Java, maybe full-time or maybe even just in a polyglot type of way. We're doing this work because we've heard from customers like yourselves that you love ACA and all the features like scale to zero and not having to deal with the Kubernetes stuff. And those things just make your life better. But some of you have mentioned that you like some Java specific features that will make your life as Java developers using ACA simpler and more efficient. And so today I want to share with you some of the things that we have been doing to bring some Java features onto ACA. And so I'll share some 3 high-level things and then a roadmap into what you can expect. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to type in the chat anytime, and we'll do our best to pick it up. All right, so ACA, you guys are all familiar with it. ACA is a great platform for running generic containers. And by generic, we mean that, really any language, any runtime, you build an app in a container, and ACA is great for running that. And some of the features I already mentioned, scale to zero, not dealing with Kubernetes stuff, and also Polyglot, being able to run an application in the same ACA environment with apps built from different languages and runtimes. And so to better cater to our Java-centric customers that are running Java apps on ACA, we began investing in 3 areas. And this is where we're starting our investment, but we will keep adding to these investments over time. Now, everything we're going to talk about today is actually already available in public preview. You can, in fact, create an ACA environment and start following along. And so I'm going to go over some of the things that we've released, and then we'll drill down into each of these. And so at a high level, the first thing we did was we invested in source to cloud, and some of the articles were talking about just kind of the deployment pipeline. As you're aware, source to cloud, it brings consistency and a better mechanism to govern IT policies. But now we added Java support in the ACA build process. And so you'll have control over what external dependencies make up your Java application. And you can update your application as changes are made using Paquito build packs. The second thing we'll talk about today is what we call manage Java components. Many Java applications and Spring applications in particular depend on services and applications like Spring Cloud Config or Eureka or Spring Boot Admin. Often these services, they just need to be there. They don't really provide differentiating value for your application, but you just need them. And it's kind of a tax to run them, to manage them, to patch them, to operate them, to update them, and so on. And so we added support for what we call managed Java components in ACA. This means you can leverage the capabilities that these services provide without having to manage the underlying services and software. We do that all for you, including upgrade, patching, keeping them on, and so forth. The last thing we'll talk about today is the investments we've made in monitoring and troubleshooting. And so, as you know, there are metrics and logs and errors that are really specific to Java apps running on JVMs. And we wanted to make an experience where Java and JVM logs, metrics, and errors are kind of front and center without having to configure anything or create dashboards and so forth. And that there should be a great default experience for Java developers on ACA. And so we're going to deep dive into these, but first I'm going to show a roadmap that kind of adds to the things that we've done, what's coming up. And so what's coming up, what's in public preview today is the source to cloud stuff. We also have support for Eureka and Spring Cloud Config in terms of our Java components. And we are releasing the Spring Cloud Gateway and Spring Boot Admin Java components in March. And then the set of features we're going to talk about with respect to monitoring and diagnosing application errors, they're going to be released at the end of this month, and we'll cover some of those features today. And so again, the 3 broad areas of investments that we're starting with: build and deploy your apps, help you run your Java components, and then monitor and troubleshoot your applications after they have been deployed. So first, let's start with build and deploy. This is a starting point for everybody, whether you're building a new application or whether you have an existing application that you want to bring to ACA. And so by default, ACA supports container images, deploying container images. And as I mentioned, we added the ability to specify a Java application, whether it's a GitHub repository or a local jar file. And the ACA build process will take care of building a container image for you. You can customize this process using build packs. so that you can meet all your organization's requirements and versions and kind of just a better management in a standardized way. And as Anthony showed this week, we just released support for deploying and running on Tomcat with WAR files. And so we're really excited about this because it gives developers more choice on how to package and run your applications on ACA. And here's why build and deployment support is important. As you're aware, common practice to deploy Java applications on a Kubernetes cluster is to Dockerize your files, or even to build a container image is just to use Docker files. This process introduces overhead. As developers, we have to take extra steps in the build process, and often, especially if you work in a large team, this can lead to inconsistencies. Imagine two development teams, team A and team B, and they have the freedom to decide their application dependencies, what their application runs on. One team chooses to use Ubuntu, for example, another team chooses to use CentOS. And now let's just imagine that there's like a CVE in the CentOS image. How do we detect and resolve these issues? And so people have come up with all sorts of different ways. There's tools out there that maybe analyze Docker files and tries to figure out which one is using an image that has like a CVE in it. And then you have to rebase. And so there's just a lot of additional process and additional tools that you may have to adopt in your engineering process to kind of handle Docker files. And so one of the things is that we recognize that, Docker files are very powerful, but maybe a little bit too low level. As a developer myself, and this is what we also hear from our customers, is that we kind of want to operate at a higher level. We want to be able to focus on our application and the things that bring value. And that's why we love ACA. And so how do we do that for the Java build process? And so that's one of the things that we invested in. And so here, what we do is now ACA natively supports building and deploying Java apps from source code, from jar files, and from WAR files. We do this with Paquito build packs, as I mentioned, and this kind of implements the cloud native build pack specification. And so the build service that's in ACA will take, source code files or a Java artifact file. And then it deploys an OCI compliant image on container apps. And so this process makes it easy to go from source to cloud. You point your ACA application at a GitHub repository, for example, and ACA takes care of the rest. It builds the container image and deploys it for you. And then at the end of that process, you have a URI that you can just kind of point to as your application. Not only that, but if you set up things like, GitHub Actions and so forth, as your code and input dependencies change, this process automatically rebuilds and creates a new ACA revision for you. And so it really automates kind of all of that process of taking your source code and bringing it to ACA. And so here's an example of it working today. I'm going to try to zoom in here. But here you can see, this is the CLI example first. Here you can see the CLI, this line at the top. It's using a very common ACA CLI that you're familiar with if you've used ACA, which is Azure Container App. As you can and as you can see, these are just kind of like the first few are just kind of default parameters. But here we've specified the location of our GitHub repository, and then everything else is just the same. And so there's no difference for Java applications, right? You just point to a repository, and then our Paquito build packs would detect that this is actually a Java repository and then kick off the Java build. And this will use all of the things that we talked about, which is just the Paquito build packs, and it'll build and deploy a Java image for you. One of the things that is important just to note is that, like I said, there is no difference in the CLI between a Java repository or a .NET repository or a Python repository. You just point it to the repository and we figure out the rest, and then we build a Java application for you. In our public preview, we only have CLI support. I should just comment here, as you can see here, once all of the work is done, it launches your application and provides a URI for you. And here, what I've done in this example is I just did it with the standard, our favorite Pet Clinic app, which is a really common for Java developers. And I just took the Pet Clinic repository. I cloned it, and then I told ACA to build and run it. Now, one of the things to note is that for the public preview, we only have CLI support. We are currently working on portal support. And I'll show you a quick mock-up of how the portal will work. As you can expect, we're just going to integrate with the default ACA portal experience. So you go to create a container app, and now you get to choose whether or not you want to build where your source is. Right. And so you could specify a container image like you always can, and you can specify source code or artifact. And when you click on source code or artifact, you get to choose whether you want a GitHub repository or a local artifact. And if you pick GitHub repository, you just point it to your GitHub repository, all the credentials and configuration that you need. I notice here, again, there's nothing Java specific about it. All the Java work is done underneath the hood. And then the other option is you can pick a local artifact. Now here is where, this is where you would specify like a jar file or a WAR file that you have built with your own process, with your own build process. And either way, you specify your artifact and then you hit create. And then the ACA app gets created with your artifacts, whether it's a GitHub repository or whether it's a jar file that you've built yourself. And then it would deploy for you. And so that's build and deploy. We're really excited about these features because we think it'll make it a little bit easier for you to get your application from source code and running on ACA with as little steps as possible. So the next thing I want to talk about is the application itself. More often than not, a Java application actually depends and relies on other Java components in a market, whether open source or not, for discovery, registrations, monitoring, and so forth. When you run your application on premise, often what you have to do is you have to take these applications and kind of build them from an open source library. Maybe you're using something like Spring Cloud config, and you would download the open source library, you would build a container image out of them, and then you would run them, you would manage them, you would update it, and so forth. Now, one of the features that we're bringing to ACA is the ability to have managed Java components. We will patch, upgrade, and manage the availability of these services so that you can focus on the things that are important to you, namely building your application and all the business logic that will help you make more money. And so another thing to consider here is that when you use a managed Java component, we only charge for the compute that is used. So from a price perspective, there's no difference to you. So there's really no reason for you to run your own Spring components or any of the components that we offer. You should let ACA handle it for you so that you can focus on the things that bring you value. As I mentioned earlier, 2 components are available right now in public preview. We have to publish the documentation. It's not published yet. And those 2 components today are managed Eureka for service discovery and managed Spring Cloud config for application configuration. With these components, you kind of get out of the box opinionated service discovery and application configuration. And at the end of March, we will be releasing managed components for Spring Cloud Gateway and for Spring Boot Admin. So I want to show you how easy it is to enable these components. And again, these portal experiences are a mock-up, but you can expect that when you create a container app, you will be able to specify a component to add to the app that your app will use. And so here, this is a mock-up again, but here you just say like, I want to add a connection to a Java component, whether that's Eureka or config and so forth. You can also add a component after a container app is created. But either way, whether you added it at the beginning when you created the app or whether you added it after you created the app, your application will now have access to the features that are provided by these applications. And you just need to take advantage of them using your favorite Spring Cloud annotations or APIs. And then your application will be able to talk to Eureka for discovery or config for application config. And you don't have to manage any of those services. And so if you're not familiar with some of these components, I'm going to go over the 4 components very quickly. And I'll go over these slides. I'm going to assume that you know what these are, but I'll just go over them quickly. So Spring Cloud Eureka. This is really for service discovery. One thing to note here is that we will allow you to create one or more Eureka instances. And so most of the time, one instance is enough, and you can create one Eureka instance, and you can connect, however many container apps running Java or Spring to these Eureka instances. But there are certain situations where you may want a second instance or a third instance, and we allow you to create as many instances as you want. And you'll just have to associate or bind your application to the appropriate Eureka instance. Now, sometimes people do this because they want to run maybe a publicly visible Eureka or a non-publicly visible, and so depending on your application needs, you have that flexibility. But the way Eureka works, as you may be aware, there will be a Eureka instance that we run, and then your applications will connect to it. You'll register yourself using the Eureka libraries, and then you can discover each other. Your applications can discover each other using the Eureka libraries. And so that's Eureka for Spring for service discovery. We also will support Spring Cloud Config. And again, very similar to Eureka, you can create one or more Spring Cloud Config instances. And each one of these instances is effectively a config store that your application can simply use the Spring Cloud libraries to store and to read configuration. Again, we expect that most people will just need one instance. But if there are some situations where you may want to have multiple instances of Spring Cloud Config, we will support that as well. At the end of March, we'll release support for Spring Cloud Gateway. This is a very common gateway that's used by Spring developers. It allows you to register your application endpoints and to route endpoints appropriately. And so we will have support for this. Now, one of the things about Spring Cloud Gateway is that scaling is a really important thing because, the more requests your application may take, you may have to scale Spring Cloud Gateway up. Or if your application has some downtime, you can scale it down. And that's where the managed component for ACA will be really, really beneficial because we will handle that for you. You don't have to do the scaling yourself. The last component I want to call attention to is Spring Boot Admin. It is a very common tool that people use to debug and to diagnose what's going on or to monitor what's going on with your Spring apps. And so we'll have support for Spring Boot Admin. You'll be able to connect to the Spring Boot Admin portal, and you'll be able to view all the data that you're used to about your apps running on ACA. And this will be available kind of just out of the box for you. You don't have to build a Spring Boot Admin app. You don't have to manage it. You don't have to keep it up. It'll be there out of the box for you if you use ACA. All right, so that's some of the investments that we're doing to help you run your application. The last section, we're going to talk about monitoring and then diagnostics. So monitoring is important because you want to know how well your app is running. And so logs and metrics and all of these things are powerful. And as Java developers, we're kind of familiar and we kind of want access to things like JVM metrics or GC metrics so that we can kind of debug and understand how things are used and kind of architect our application appropriately. And so one of the things we want to do is we want to provide these metrics for you out of the box. And so at the end of this month, when you create an application with Java, you're going to have out of the box JVM metrics available in the monitor page, in Azure Monitor. And you could use these metrics for whatever you want to use them for auto scaling. You could use them for diagnostics. You can use them to kind of see how your app is doing. And so these are all things that will be beneficial for you as you're running your Java applications on ACA. The other thing we're doing is we're adding kind of default dashboards. And the first one we're kind of experimenting with is a default dashboard for memory consumption. As you're probably aware, and certainly what we see is that most of the time, the kind of like top issue that applications face is memory pressure. And so we're going to create a default dashboard where you can kind of see the memory usage of your app running on ACA. You can see them over time. You can see non-heap usage, direct memory usage, all of these things. We just want to create a dashboard for you that is there out of the box so that you can kind of have access to this without having to do any work yourself. Over time, we will add additional dashboards as we kind of see how customers react to it and kind of what's valuable. With respect to diagnostics, there's just a common thing that we all wrestle with when we're building services. We just want to know what's going on. We want to check for errors. We want to be able to kind of get, stack information. All of these things we need when our app goes down. And the reality is apps go down more often than we not. Our North Star direction here is really to deliver a robust and great diagnostic experience so that when errors happen, you can kind of find them on the spot. Our goal is to reduce mean time to recovery for any Java application running on ACA. And so I want to share with you some of the things that we've done here. So one of the things that we've done is, the ability to configure log levels and customize them per package name. Now sometimes you may want kind of like really verbose logs for certain things, but you don't want any logs for other components. And so we've given you the ability to do this by Java package. And so here you can see that, maybe for the Azure package, we don't have any logging. And maybe for the test package, we have info logging. And so we allow you to do that to control the granularity of logging from the portal. The other thing that we've done is we've added support to capture a JFR dump from your application running on ACA. Now, JFR is a very common, tool, Java Flight Recorder, just a great tool to capture any information from your Java application as it is running. So we give you a really simple experience to capture the JFR dump. And then, of course, you can take that capture and then analyze it in your favorite tool, probably Java Mission Control, so you can kind of see what's going on in your application. And as I mentioned, these are the things that we're doing right now. You'll have access to this by the end of March. And then over time, we're going to continue to add more and more tools and metrics and logs and diagnostics. And our goal is to make it so that it's easy for you to understand what's going on in your Java application as it's running on ACA. And so that covers the 3 topics that I wanted to go over today. And just to recap, the investments that we've made really are to help you get your application onto ACA quickly with our source to cloud investments. And then the second thing we want to do is to help you run applications on ACA, where you don't have to run and manage your own Spring Cloud config or Eureka instances. We will do that for you to make your life easier and to make it more efficient for you to build and run applications on ACA. And finally, we have some investments to help you debug and analyze and monitor your application. And our goal is to continue to invest in this area so that when issues arise, you'll be able to quickly identify and resolve them better and more effectively on ACA. And so the last thing I want to do is just a call to action. We have a page up, and this page will continue to be updated as we release more and more features. As I mentioned, the next set of things will go out at the end of March, but you can visit the Java on ACA documentation page. There's a series of blogs that Sean and others on our team do, and Anthony kind of pointed out to them earlier today. And then we have a tutorial to help you deploy a basic Java file, Java app onto ACA. If you haven't done that before, you can give that a shot and kind of try out some of the things that we talked about today. So that's all I have for today. And if there are any questions, we'll be more than happy to take them right now.
All right, that was awesome, Tim. So Tiago had a question in chat that I think Simon answered, but maybe we can put that on the screen here and maybe talk about that. So we want to know, hold on, let me just put everyone on the screen. Which versions of Java are supported?
That's a great question. I think when you ask that question, I'm going to assume you're asking it with respect to the integration, say with like maybe some of the managed components or the logging things. In that case, I believe we support the latest Java version. And maybe if you can specify which old version you're looking for, I can be more specific about that. But yeah, let me double check. Did Simon answer that question in the chat too? But if you're just running a Java application on ACA, the answer to that is whatever Java application you want, right? Like whatever Java version you want to use. But if you're going to use some of the managed components, there's going to be some versioning from an API perspective, and so I can get you more information on that, Thiago.
Awesome, and I think Simon also answered in terms of
cloud. We currently support JDK 8.
Yeah.
JDK 11, JDK 17, and JDK 21. But I added that in the chat too. So.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Simon.
Okay. Well, I think with that,
do you remind me one more time? Sorry, Tim. Can you remind me one more time which of these things are already available versus public preview and soon to come, just as a
of course,
for maybe people who...
So first of all, the public preview is all CLI based, and the things that are available are the source code to cloud, so we could build a Java repository, a jar file, and a WAR file with Tomcat. Spring Cloud Eureka and Spring Cloud Config are available right now, and Spring Cloud Gateway and Spring Boot Admin are going to come end of March. And then the portal experiences for the diagnostics and JFR and stuff, those are going to come at the end of March as well.
Cool.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, so thanks so much for joining us, Tim. Looks like there are no more questions in the chat. Look forward to having people try out all the different things you mentioned that are live today, and I guess going to go live at the end of the month. So yeah, with that, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you.
See y'all. Bye.